Okay, this is Jimmy Jive, and you're listening to Motor City Rock Talk. Today, my guest has been a member of a band that's been around for a long, long time. Really good blues rock or rock blues power trio. Quite outstanding. They've got 6 full-length CDs under their belt, one including a live album, which intrigues me, and we'll talk about that. Anyway, the name of the band is The Mugs, and today I'm going to be talking to the lead guitarist, actually the only guitarist and vocalist, Mr. Danny Muggs. Hey, Danny, how's it going?
Oh, great, Jimmy. Thank you so much for having me on, man. This is really cool to be on your show. Thank you.
No problem. Appreciate it. Okay, let's start with a little background. Tell me a little bit about basically where you're from originally, some of your early music influences, and that kind of stuff, basically.
Yeah, right on. I grew up as a Beatles fan. So when I first started playing guitar, I was 19 years old up at Michigan State. I just wanted to learn Beatles songs. That's why I picked up this acoustic guitar, and Day Tripper was the first riff I learned, so, was always enamored with the riff, with bands like Kiss and Queen and AC/DC, like a good riff. Day Tripper seemed like a good place to start for a novice guitar player. Ultimately, I getting heavy into blues. My stepdad's cousin brought over a mind-blowing 3 CDs. He's like, Danny, you're getting into blues, I'm getting into, Muddy Waters and Jimmy Reed and Freddie King, and he's like, oh man, you got to check these guys out. You probably never heard of them. It's called Savoy Brown. British blues, up there, with the early Peter Green and Fleetwood Mac. They were in that era, but I've never heard of them before. So I listened to it, and it was just this aggressive, heavy blues that I just wasn't acclimated to, I just, knew the 50s and 60s blues. And hearing the British psychedelic stuff, it changed me as a guitar player. I'm like, wow, I want to be a heavier, I want to take blues to where the British guys took, your Led Zeppelins and your Yardbirds and Cream, those cats were elevating, volume in blues and just playing it more aggressively. Humble Pie was a huge one. It was Savoy Brown and Humble Pie.
Love Humble Pie.
And then Rory Gallagher. Those are the ones, and always come back to the American ZZ Top. But so when Tony and I were talking, we're East Side guys from East Detroit.
Right.
So went to Notre Dame High School, Catholic High School. We were kind of athletic kids, but we were the nerdy musicians in our circle of friends. And Tone and I would play acoustic guitar together, and then we ended up joining a blues band called the Detroit Underground Blues Band and the Vince Knight and the Days, just a couple of local bands. I was 22, 23 years old, so was Tone, was the same age, and we were just, pots around just learning the standards of blues. Once come the year 1990, Tone and I formed a band called Fat Belly Brown after that, which was kind of modified after Smashing Pumpkins and Nirvana, the East Side sound in the late 90s was very that type of thing. But once Savoy Brown and Humble Pie got introduced into my life, I'm like, Tone? And so I broke up Fat Belly Brown. I'm like, Tone, I would like to form a blues rock band. What do you think about forming a blues rock band? He's like, I'm in if you're in. So I broke up the one band just because the other two were into the 90s rock, and I just wanted to go back. I want to be like Cactus and those type of bands. So we formed the Mugs with our buddy Matt Rost, who was in a band called the Immortal Winos of Soul. We saw him playing drums. We're like, God, this guy's fantastic. Asked him to join the Mugs, and actually the early days of the Mugs, I was looking for a lead guitar player because I didn't feel comfortable playing leads. I wanted to, try and write riffs and hopefully sing over them, but to have a lead guitar player, because I was just kind of rudimentary. The guitar players we approached weren't, they're like, blues rock? I don't know, man, the ones we asked, they shined us on. Ultimately came down to me like, all right, we'll be a 3-piece, the James Gang, Rory Gallagher, the ZZ Top. Screw it, I gotta take the mantle myself. So that's how the Mugs, in a nutshell, we started. Tone was completely on board, and at the time he was a straight up bass player, was just playing John Paul Jones type of bass, and him and I and Matt just gelled. I just wrote riffs and tried to sing bluesy rock over them, and that's the germination of the Mugs as of 25 years ago, which is shocking to me.
That's excellent. I just want to chime in real quick. For those of you that don't know it, Savoy Brown morphed into Foghat, who were, of course, a legendary blues rock band. That's something right there. But yeah, Savoy Brown is classic.
It's always a bummer for me insofar as Foghat achieved such mainstream success, and Kim Simmons, who basically started Savoy Brown with Lonesome Dave Everett,
right,
who went into Foghat. They started Savoy Brown together, and Lonesome Dave, left Savoy Brown and went on to, they're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I think.
Yeah,
Foghat. And poor Kim Simmons, he passed away last year or 2 years ago. I saw him like 7 or 8 times. One of my favorite guitar players of all time. My love for Kim Simmons. That poor guy, just never got the acclaim he deserved.
That's for sure, and you're right, he was a phenomenal guitar player. The other thing I was going to mention that, you mentioned the blues great and Savoy Brown. A lot of what I hear reminds me a lot of Led Zeppelin, and not in the sense of like you're ripping them off, but I'm saying the overall tonality and the fact that a lot of the songs seem to be really based on riffs. Now, was that intentional, or was that just something that came about?
Straight up intentional, and thank you for, the shout out for the Led Zeppelin type of thing. And it takes me back to learning Day Tripper. I think the riff is an art in and of itself.
Yeah.
Because, and I love bands that, just do chords, down, 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 and I love those type of bands. The ones I gravitate towards are the ones who do something really interesting with a single note riff. It's so heavy and powerful, a riff, you can chug along, but a single note riff, oh man, just one of the most iconic ones. Brian May's riff in Bohemian Rhapsody, which Freddie wrote, by the way, fun fact.
Yeah.
Freddie wrote that riff and then Brian did it. But single note riffs just intrigued me, so I was like, all right, what do I have to offer the pantheon of blues rock riffs? Which, it was bizarre because it was a passion of mine, but there was no, in early 2000s, everyone's listening to Radiohead and, bands of the like, and no one's like really riff rocking, but I just loved it so much. I was like, all right, I want to see what my competition it wasn't who was playing, in 2001. My competition, who I wanted to emulate, were the bands from the late 60s to the mid 70s.
Right.
Years. So, I kind of thought of myself as, if I was born in that time, hearing those records, what would be my record in response to those records? I wasn't responding to what the modern sound was going. I was responding to how those records made me feel. I was just a riff writer out of time. I should have been born 30 years prior, but then I'd be 80 now. So.
You were ahead of your time, actually.
Yeah.
If you think about it, right?
Yeah, really, because riff rock is still out there.
Right.
There's still some bands doing it, and some bands doing really well doing it. Rival Sons and Royal Blood, there are some bands that, caught the zeitgeist where they can still play, decent sized venues and festivals and stuff like that. So it's still out there, and it's just such a passion of mine that I just can't stop, So I'm just a sucker for the riff.
The stuff you write is really, really good. It's really catchy. Because I've always loved that blues rock stuff too, like Savoy Brown, like you mentioned. Obviously, Foghat, ZZ Top. Led Zeppelin, of course, is my favorite of all time. And the reason for that is because they were blues-based. Every album was different, if you really think about it. There were always those elements of blues in there, but they added so much more to it,
Yeah,
and that's
Led
how
Zeppelin 3. They got kind of acoustic, and I love Led Zeppelin 3.
And that's kind of how I feel about your stuff. It kind of reminds me of that, the way the band has evolved, from the first album right up to, your latest thing. The one thing I wanted to ask you real quick, and this may take you back, you may not even know the reference, but as far as naming the band the Mugs, was that in any way in reference to Muggs from the Bowery Boys?
No. You see the Bowery Boys?
Yeah, you remember the Bowery Boys?
No,
Muggs?
I do actually, and that's been mentioned to me before, but it didn't come from the Bowery Boys. Yeah, they were the Mugs, or in old gangster flicks. Oh, I'm gonna get you, you dirty mug.
Yeah.
You know, I'm gonna wipe that mug off your face.
Yeah.
It's so funny, the story of the Mugs, try and spin this quick. Bartender at Caju Cafe, and one of the other guys that I work with, Jim Shanley, he started using the word mug as a bartender. When he sees a hot chick, it's like, I'd like to get all up in that mug. Check out that mug. So it got into our heads. So we would, just start, me and Tony would be using mugs just for laughs out of everything. And this was when we first got Matt Ross in the band, the drummer. And we were trying to come up with a name, and Matt's like, we should call ourselves the Mugs. I'm like, that's actually a good name. And I thought about it, Mugs.
Yeah.
I'm like, that sucked with one G. There's no gravitas toward
Yeah.
it. So I'm like, what if we had two G's and then we'll be the Mug?
Yeah.
We were high on kids, having beers and thinking that was funny. And I looked at it like the Mugs. There's an old 60s band called the Fugs, and that extra consonant was hilarious to me. All right, if we're going to call it the Mugs with two G's, and we still have to say that to this day, it's like, what's the name of your band? The Mugs with two G's. Because I'll just look up the Mugs, Mugs, and just get a bunch of coffee cups. This ain't the band I was looking for.
Right.
I don't need it.
The other thing about that was, you're Danny Muggs, obviously Tony Muggs. Why is your drummer not a Mug?
So after Tony had his strokes, the Mugs had to take a hiatus because we weren't sure if we were going to play again after he had a stroke. So I joined a band called King Snakes just to play. A really cool bunch of guys doing heavy humble pie type of riffs, and and I'm like, oh, I'd love to play with them. The guitar player that I replaced in their band was also named Danny. So when they were saying Danny, which Danny? When they were referring to me, they'd say, Danny from the Mugs, Danny Muggs.
Right.
They started calling me Danny Muggs. Then when the Mugs, then it just caught on. People started calling me Danny Muggs, and then it just came into Tony Muggs. Tony Muggs, Danny Muggs, but the drummer is always Todd Glass. It's always Matt Ross. They never got, Matt Muggs. People think Tony and I are brothers.
Right, right.
Because we've been around forever. And they think, a lot of people think Muggs is our last name. Your last name isn't Muggs? It just caught on. Cool. Danny Muggs. My actual last name is Metric. Metric, but pronounced metric like the metric system. But nobody knows me as Danny Metric. They're like, it's metric, like the metric system. Like, you're Daniel Metric? I'm like, yup. And Tony DiNardo, which is hilarious, but he's, Tony Muggs and Danny Muggs. I love how those, that's just how nicknames.
Really cool, man.
Jimmy Page, Danny Muggs, it has that type of, instead of Daniel Metric, Danny Muggs.
Yeah, I think it's cool. Like I said, I wasn't sure if it was a homage to Muggs from the Bowery Boys, or like you said, something to the gangster
it
thing.
was just a coincidence as far as a happenstance, cool name. But I do know about the Muggs from the Bowery Boys.
I wasn't sure if you did, 'cause I think you're quite a bit younger than I am.
Not my
you know, the other thing that's cool about that too is, you know, I was thinking about it at the time. I'm like going, well, is this a homage to like the Ramones? You know, they're all, you know, Joey Ramone, you know, Dee Dee Ramone,
right.
that kind of thing. But then I thought, well, the Ramones weren't a blues rock band, so it's probably not. It's probably, you know, my buddy Muggs from the Bowery Boys, you know, the leader of the gang. But it's interesting how that came out, you know, how you guys decided that. That is really cool.
It just happened organically. People did it to us, and we just accepted it.
That's really
I'm
cool.
sorry, you can go ahead.
Tony, did he play in some other bands before you guys formed the Mugs?
Well, yes, technically, Tone and I were in all the bands that Tone was in were bands that I was in. So,
okay.
The Detroit Underground Blues Band got him into the band, and then Vince Knight and the Days, I got him into the band, and then we formed Fat Belly Brown. That was me and Tone. You know, everything was me and Tone. He's got his own band, Dude. So that's right up Tony Muggs' joint. Tony DiNardo, you know, he's writing his own tunes, arranging, doing his own thing. Fantastic. So this is the first one without. That's how that's shaken out. Maybe I'll shoehorn my way in. He's putting out a new record called Destroy It. He's in the studio right now. So I'm going to shoehorn my way in. I'd like to do one solo on one track.
There you go. And you had mentioned earlier, too, about looking for a second guitar to play the lead. I don't think that's necessary. I think you're fine. I think the style you play, as far as your music and the type of leads you play, fit perfectly. I don't think you'd want to add anybody else as far as like that, or, you know, you don't want to get somebody that's going to sit there and just thrash all through it and stuff. That would lose the magic. So stick with it, stay with it, don't change your style.
Thank you so much, Jimmy. And you're right, we've been doing it for 25 years. It was just the initial first days of, you know, me being uncomfortable, you know, being the front man, singer, guitar player. It took me a minute, lots of minutes, to get comfortable with, you know, pulling double duty, singing and playing guitar in a three-piece. There's so many cogs turning at the same time in your brain, and you're just like, oh my God, this is overwhelming.
Yes.
But, you know, I'm starting to feel comfortable in that.
Well, you're doing an outstanding job, you know, so I wouldn't change it. The other thing was, you know, Tony had his stroke, and you guys went on, you know, a little break or hiatus and all that so he could rehab. And when he came back, he started playing the bass lines on the keyboards. Now, I think that's extremely interesting. How has that affected your band as far as the sound you're doing on a keyboard?
Good question. Before Tone Stroke, like I was saying earlier, he went full bore on, he was like, I'm going to be John Paul Jones. If you're writing these riffs, so John Paul Jones has a lot of nuance on the strings, you know, sliding in, sliding out. Those are luxuries you don't have on a keyboard because it's just like bump, 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 bump. A keyboard is very finite. You don't have slide ins and slide outs. So Tone had to learn how to play the bass in a way that with lots of hammer-ons and things like that. And it affected my songwriting insofar as I tried to make the riffs a little more easier to play. You know, I just had to keep Tone in mind as far as, you know, he's not going to play like a song like Going Down, you know, just you can't do that one note, you know. So I would go to songs like Gonna Need My Help, where Tone could dig in on the low end of the keyboard and I could dig in on the guitar riff. It changed the way I wrote songs, but as Tone progressed and got better and better on the keyboard, I was able to get more complex with the riffs. Like, oh man, I don't even worry about Tone anymore because he'll find a way to make it work underneath. If I write something sort of complicated, he finds a way to make it work. So it's just wonderful how far he's come.
so much. Let's sing out there for a drink. I made it through. I didn't get too drunk. I'm so happy.
In his mastery of the keyboard bass.
Yeah, and of course the other thing you mentioned about him being kind of influenced by John Paul Jones is the fact that of course John Paul Jones wasn't just a bass player, he was a keyboard player. And they had to do a lot of their stuff where, he used pedals or tonality to fill that in. Now, did Tony have any previous experience playing keyboards, or he just all of a sudden just say, well, I got to do this?
He had zero experience playing keyboards. I mean, zero. When we came up with the idea, there was a friend of ours named Matt Smith made mention, like, while Tony was recovering from a stroke and he was doing hyperbaric oxygen therapy in California, we, did a charity event to send him out there, hoping that would restore his arm. After 2 years, we realized his arm just wasn't going to come back. And Matt's like, you can, play Ray Manzarek style on the bass.
Yeah.
There was a band called The Henchmen, who I seen, they play a Farfisa bass, and I'm like, it sounds just like a bass. So when Tony and I put our heads together, he's like, Matt Smith mentioned this. I'm like, The Henchmen I just saw, they play bass on a keyboard. Tony can play bass on a keyboard. So it was just like that, a snap of a finger. Tony's like, all right, I have this Casio keyboard in California that I just kind of like write a melody on or something like that. I mess with a drum pattern or something. I'm going to learn the Muggs, the 5 songs that we had for his stroke. I'm going to learn those on this little Casio keyboard. I mean, it was like really 2 feet long.
Yeah,
piece of shit. Bam, 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 bam,
yeah.
bam. That's his first keyboards ever. He learned it on the Casio. Then when he came back to Detroit, we got a Fender Rhodes, because we didn't know what we were doing. Like, how do you make a keyboard sound like a bass? So we had those tons of trial and error on getting the keyboard to sound deep and heavy through a bass cabinet. Once we finally dialed that in, I mean, it took us 10 years to like dial it in. Now he's just got the most perfect bass tone. It took forever, but to answer your question, no, he had zero. He'd never played a keyboard in his life before he learned how to play bass on a keyboard.
That's exceptional because it takes a lot to do it, especially, is he right-handed or left-handed?
He's right-handed.
Right-handed. So now he's got to do everything on his left hand, to play the bass. That's tricky enough. To do that and write up bass lines that are going to fit your riffs, that takes a lot of talent and a lot of time and a lot of attention.
It truly does.
So bravo for him and bravo for you guys sticking with that. It works. It really works. It's really cool.
Nerve-wracking when we first started, like, does this work or is this going to be pathetic? Because we were worried about, just getting pity applause. Like, here's the guy who had the stroke and, they're okay. No, we came out and like, we're going to be badass or we just suck and we'll go away on our own accord. We had to forge identity, irregardless of Tone's stroke. We didn't want the pity, the sympathy.
Well, I'm sure
we wanted to be
either.
recognized as a riffy blues rock band, and it took a couple years to get through that, but I'm glad we fought for it. It was nerve-wracking when we started, but
kudos to you also for taking the time and patience to hang in there and take off with that. Now, like I mentioned in the intro also, you have 6 full-length albums under your belt to date, and they're all really, really good. I really, really love them, especially starting with first one. But the one thing that's really interesting to me, because I've talked to so many bands and so many artists about this, and they all seem to frown on it. You guys did a live album. A live album. Who does live albums anymore? I love live albums. I mean, that's really, I talk about your old school, because back in my day, I grew up in the 70s, so back in everybody did a live album. And you talk about Humble Pie. Come on.
Yes.
And Led Zeppelin and all these bands. What got you to thinking, like, we should do a live album? What made you think to do that?
Well, hilariously enough, you said Humble Pie, and you were exactly right. So the Muggs were coming off I think it was our 4th time from Europe. It's mostly, when we did our European tours, it was mostly Spain, like 15 shows in Spain, 2 in France, 2 in Germany, hopefully 1 in Italy. We kept going back year after year, and we became a really tight unit after the 3rd tour of Europe. Caju Cafe, where I was the bartender at, or I worked at for 32 years, and the bartender for like 20 years, is a wonderful place that the Mugs would always go back to and play. And one of the things that stuck in my head was it's like a 100-year-old wood building, and it sounds like a recording studio.
Yeah.
Like when you play in there, it's got the carpet, it's got the wood walls, it's a warm sounding room. I'm like, I'd love to record a live record here. You know, just thinking, live record at the Caju, just for shits and giggles. We'll get one guy, Jim Kissling came out and recorded it, you know, let's just do it for a night. And then we didn't realize at the time that this turned out to be, you know, come to the Mugs live recording. We're just going to record a record. We weren't even sure if we were going to release it. We just wanted to document it.
Right.
You know, at the peak of where we were at third record, and you know, at the Caju Cafe, didn't think much of it, but Rockin' the Fillmore, Humble Pie, you know, a double live record. So, you know, I was an asshole enough to just to think, not just one record, you just take the best ones. We did that record. The record you hear is that record in its entirety. We did 2 small overdubs in the studio, like 2. I fixed one vocal and something else. Other than that, completely as it was in front of the show at the Caju, and they took out all the tables at the Caju, which was wonderful because they're like, well, all right, the capacity at the Caju is 120 people with table, and they're like, there's a huge demand for this. We're gonna do 200 people. So we did 200 people, crammed them in. So it was standing room only in the Caju, and the crowd wonderfully on the live record makes us sound so much bigger than we are. Sounds like we're playing a stadium, but we're just playing the Caju. But the way Jim put the microphones out just gave the room a full sound, and it was a magical night. Me, Todd, and Tony, I thought we played fantastically. Me, you know, I think, well, I could have sang that line better. I could have sang that line better.
Great record, though.
And when we were done, we're like, you know what? Let's put this out, you know, a double live record. And our awesome friend Jason Seaman did the most excellent ass-kicking cover artwork for that record. It's Full Tilt. It's a pinball machine with all the, you know, everything that's associated with the Mugs, all little Easter eggs and all that stuff, you know. And we put up the live record just for, you know, as a document of where the Mugs were at one time, you know. It's probably the only time in my life I'll ever do a live record, but I'm so glad how it came out. I still revisit it.
I just think it's totally cool, and I wish more bands would do that. The other thing about that I was wondering, was there ever any thought of doing it, outdoors? I mean, they have the stage outdoors also, or would that have been, you think, more difficult to do as far as recording?
That would have definitely been a recording nightmare. It would have been a lot drier. I would even have considered, the Mugs are on, there's a lot of YouTube outside concerts, and I'll watch them, just annotate my performance, like, all right, what could I have done better? Things like that. I'm like, oh man, sometimes the sound is great, but the Caju inside was for sure, that's the only way I could have wanted to do it, just for that warmth that the recording gave. Outside, there's just, and who knows what the weather's, any disaster can happen outdoors. So yeah, indoors was the way to do it. Caju should be a recording studio.
Yeah. Was that place your number one pick, and did that have to do with the fact that you'd worked there that long and you were familiar with how great the room sounded? Was there ever any thought of recording it anywhere else?
No, that was exactly it. Every time Caju was home base. We always called it home base. It was a place where, me particularly, and Tony and Todd, we just felt the most comfortable, looking out the sea of people, they were all our friends. So I knew every face in the crowd. I knew the bartenders and the people working the floor, and next door they got feather bowling. I knew all the feather bowlers. I just felt completely comfortable. Like if I was going to record live, I would want to do it in front of all my friends, and that's how the Caju came about.
So as to the other albums, the studio albums, where specifically were they recorded, and were they all recorded in the same studio?
No, actually, we recorded first two at, Temper Mill in Royal Oak. I'm trying to think of Temper Mill. That was Royal Oak. The last two we recorded with Adam Cox. I don't know the name of his studio. It's in Hamtramck. And our third record we recorded in Ghetto Studios with Jim Diamond. It was exciting to work with Jim Diamond. He was doing all the local garagey type bands, and we were one of the crazier bands that he had to deal with. We weren't very garagey sounding. We were kind of very technical, and the record turned out great with Adam Cox in Hamtramck. 3 different studios for those records. One was with Jim Kissling. We recorded a bunch of stuff with him too. Per record, we kind of jumped around to different places, but for the last 2, we worked with Adam. If we had a future one in the works, which is a possibility, I'd go back to Adam again. I love that studio and how he worked.
Now, the other thing I was going to mention, and there again, kudos to you and the band, you guys won a bunch of awards. I saw one that you even won one for an instrumentalist.
We've been very lucky with Detroit Music Awards. It's so wonderful to be nominated, and these are your peers and your friends that you're nominated with, and it's such an honor. The Mugs have been so lucky. I'm staring at them right now. I have them on a little place on my shelf. The awards over there. We won Record of the Year 3 times.
Damn, that's awesome.
I won instrumentalist twice. Tone won Best Bass Instrumentalist. It's really sweet to look at these things, to be acknowledged for what you've done. I'm just beside myself. I'm like, all right, the Mugs did pretty well for our 25 years. Not that awards particularly mean anything, but it's nice to look back on.
The other thing I was going to ask you about was, you said you toured over in Europe. Did you guys do much touring here in the States outside of Michigan?
Actually, we didn't. We kind of did like a little Midwest swing, and we did a couple of shows on the East Coast, but the days of between me, Tone, and Todd, we weren't able to get out for extended periods of time, because I joined the Paybacks with Wendy Case. And the Paybacks, it was in the early days where we traveled to California and back, all the way down south, all the way up through the north. We did every state, 35 days. We just, toured and traveled. The Mugs, unfortunately, we had to stay a little bit more localized. So Europe was the farthest that we, did actual tours. But in the States, we would just be weekend warriors, go to Toledo, Pomeroy, Ohio. We had an awesome place in Pomeroy, Ohio, which is at the most southernmost of Ohio, right across there's the Ohio River, and then I think Kentucky's right across the river. And, that's as far as we got. Virginia, West Virginia, a show in New York. But yeah, unfortunately, the Mugs, a self-made band, so if we want to tour, it's on our own dime, and we have to, we all have day jobs, so we had to, do that type of scenario. I'd love to get an actual tour where we can just do 20 days through the Midwest.
Well, the last thing I want to discuss with you a little bit is America's Great American Band. How did that come about? How did you get on that show?
That was fascinating. So a friend of ours, Britannia, caught wind of this show coming out. It's like they're taking auditions for the show called The Next Great American Band. The Mugs should submit something. And so Tone's like, all right, maybe I'll end up submitting something. He'd never submitted anything out of nowhere, and I don't know how this happened. This is some sort of miracle. I got a phone call when I was living in Canfield in downtown Detroit, and from a guy who said, I'm a talent guy who's doing a show called The Next Great American Band. You guys came up on our radar. Would you like to come out to Burbank, California and do an audition for this reality TV show we're doing? And I couldn't believe it. I'm like, is this a joke? They called me. If they called Tony, Tony's all business. Me, I'm the skeptic this just doesn't sound right, but he sounded legit. I called Tony with it, and Tony ended up following up with this, like, Dan, this seems legit. They want to fly us out to Burbank for this audition. So they flew us out to Burbank for the audition, and there was 6,000 bands in the running. Came down to, when they flew us out there, it came down to 150 bands that they flew out. So we were all staying in all these hotels, and me, I'm just thinking like, oh God, we're blues rock. No one's gonna care about us. But we're in Burbank, right. So we were partying and just, running around. LA was our main base, but the recording studio where we had to audition was at Burbank. So, we're having fun for 2 days. We did our audition with 100 other bands. You had a 5-minute audition. So you had to go in there and we had to explain, Tony's bass scenario, because the judges are like, all right, we don't understand. Is he playing lead keys? Like, no, he's a bass player. He had a stroke. We're a 3-piece. So in our 5 minutes, we had the judges there. We did our 3 songs. And they're like, thank you very much. Just go out in the waiting room. So we're waiting out there with 200 other kids, 150 bands in this huge auditorium. They came out like, all right, we have the 12 bands that we're going to send to Las Vegas for the next round for the filmed round for the actual TV show to get on the show. And they named off 3 bands, and one of them was the Mugs from Detroit. We're like, oh my God, we're in this huge group of 200 people. They called our name to go. It was 30 bands left out of the 150, went down to 30 to go to Las Vegas. We couldn't believe it. Like, oh my God, that was in 2 days, because we just did White Boy Blues off the first record. It's like a we just did some sort of heavy thing. And I just said after what we did, like, thank you so much for having us. I'm like, we bombed. Let's just go back in the room and talk to the other guys. We ended up going to Las Vegas with the last 30 bands, and that was the film going with who were the judges? Sheila E., Johnny Resnick, and the resident Simon Cowell guy. His name was Dicko. His actual name.
Yeah, that fit him.
It did fit him. He was there to just bash you. Sheila was there to say, you guys did great. Johnny Resnick, I could have done better. Dicko's like, that was awful, bloody awful. You get that. It was all so formulaic and hilarious. And this was in the desert of Las Vegas. It's outside footage. It was at noon. It was 110 degrees out,
God.
But it was that dry heat. My voice was gone, so we just went up there, and we're not going to get to the actual TV show. Let's just let it all fly. We did a song called Slow Curve, and let it fly, and then they just send us home. And we did Slow Curve. The judges kind of freaked out. It's like, that's a rock and roll we need for this show. We're sending you to the actual show. So they sent us to the actual show, and that's a whole nother story when we got to the actual show. But it was just kind of happenstance. We got a phone call from a word came down about this band in Detroit, and I'm sure they were intrigued with Tony's story too. Right. That was something they played pretty heavy on. Come back from a stroke. That makes for great TV as far as producers go. From however we were at, we're just happy to get our foot in the door and prove ourselves. Because if we sucked, they would have sent us home. Like, all right, we didn't suck. We actually went out there. A lot of the bands were just like mid-tempo, and we rocked. I just said, Tone, we're just gonna rock. I hope they send us home. I was just gonna punk rock them out. You're like, all right, you guys just aren't what we're looking for. That's what I expect.
What the hell was the thinking? You obviously didn't have any control of it. To have you perform in the desert in that kind of heat. Do they not know what that does to singers, to instruments, to the whole thing? What kind of idiot would decide to do that?
It was a bad move. They were looking for some sort of aesthetic value. This looks cool playing out in the deserts in Las Vegas. Even the judges were like, they were like hot and sweaty in between takes. They were getting makeup put on.
Yeah.
And you could just see them breathing hard, like, huh. And then when the cameras come on, they're like, hey, you know what? All right, guys, let's do this. They had to do it for like 4 hours, you know.
Oh, God.
TV will edit it down to 20 minutes, but it was 4 hours out in that sun. We were on a houseboat, me and all the other bands, and we were just stuck in this stifling houseboat right on the side of this little river next to the where they set up this $100,000 stage, probably out in the middle of the desert. Hilarious. It's funny you make mention of this because
that's
now
ridiculous.
I'm having hilarious thoughts in my head, like, wow, that was nutty. I've lived some nutty moments in my life.
No, that's great, because, I mean, how many people can say that they had to suffer through playing in the desert at the highest point of the sun in a hot, 120-degree day.
Auditioning for a TV show.
Yeah, for a TV
My
show.
voice is gone, noon, I'm sober. I'm like, this
I'm
is
sober.
horrifying. Give me a couple of beers or something.
Were you there to see any of the other bands perform there in the desert? Did you hang out for that, or?
Oh, yeah. The Mugs were one of the last ones that went on. So we, from our houseboat, because we had to stay out of we could only watch from a certain distance because of the camera angles. So we were all watching from this houseboat, everyone going up there and, coming back, and we'd all be like, great job, great job. There was a little monitor in the houseboat, too, so we could watch their performances. There was so much camaraderie on there because everyone was rooting, there was no egos or nothing like that. And the Mugs are happy-go-lucky guys, and people just liked us. It's like, oh, we're hanging out with these guys because their guitar player, me, he's just giggling all the time. He's just having a ball. He's not trying to look cool or nothing like that.
Was there any other bands on that were from Detroit or from Michigan at all?
No.
Well, there you go.
No, we were,
That's great.
Nashville band, there was a Florida band, a Kentucky band, a California band. Oh, yeah, as far as I know, we were the only band from the Midwest.
Wow.
Representing the rock.
There you go. Now, just out of curiosity, do you have any recollection of who ended up winning that? And did this show last long?
It was the Clark brothers, who were three brothers, so talented. They were bluegrass, fiddle, a mandolin, and an acoustic or something like that. And they sang harmonies. So they really were great with the country crowd, because the last two bands, Six Wire was the straight-up country band, kind of like a Merle Haggard type of thing, but, not as cool as Merle Haggard.
Right.
But they had that type of thing. The Clark brothers were very bluegrass. They ended up winning the whole thing. The thing about the TV show, which was interesting, was for 6 months after the TV show, when all the bands are hot, there were 12 bands left, we got voted out at third week. But you had to wait 6 months you can't go to other labels. The label that owns the TV show has their rights to you, whether they want to keep you or not. So all the interest that we had in us from the TV show, we couldn't do a thing with. And then after 6 months when it passed, they just make sure, you're kind of extinguished. So the Clark brothers, when they won the thing, after a year, I'm like, what happened to the Clark brothers? They won, they got a recording contract. Where's the big light at the end of their tunnel? Why don't I see the Clark brothers on cereal box? And then they finally came out on, there was another reality show, like the Clark brothers, winners of Next Great American Band from a couple years ago. They completely changed their look. They were wearing mascara. They were like clean-cut country boys when they were on the show. But then they had the wispy black hair, and they were trying to look goth.
Oh, really?
And they completely changed it. I'm like, oh my God, the company that, you guys need to be more up with the times. You won the show for the country crowd, but if you want to make it in this industry, you got to change your look and get more My Chemical Romance. You got to look more like that. And that was I saw him on TV doing the show. That was the last I saw him. I never heard from him again.
So was that basically the prize, was a recording contract?
Yes, it was. It was a recording contract, and they'll promote you and get you awesome opening slot. They didn't do anything for them. They changed their look. I assume to this day they're out there playing bluegrass again somewhere, because they were so talented and such nice guys. But they should have been promoted. That was the ultimate flop, that show. It didn't make anybody famous, and to this day there's never been another band competition like that. Everything's The Voice,
right?
Everything focuses on one person. They gave the band thing a try. That was 2007. Here we are 2025, and they still haven't tried the band. As far as the reality show goes, it's just not marked.
Like I said, the whole idea that they gave you a recording contract or whatever it would have been, one record, two, whatever, and then not doing anything with it. Because I had heard that is really common in those type of reality shows, like The Voice. To the public, they can produce it, you go, oh yeah, they're going to get a recording contract, they're going to go out. The last thing I'll ask you is, what are your future plans for the Mugs? Got anything in the works as far as gigs or upcoming recordings? What's up with the Mugs?
With the Mugs these days, we're in a slight hiatus insofar as Tone's working real hard on his solo new Dude record. But me, in my perspective, I'm writing a bunch of ideas, kind of germinating to see what, when the time comes, maybe sometime this summer, I'm going to get together with Tone, we have some time and throw these ideas at him and see if maybe we can get something going in the fall. Because I have a bunch of riffs I don't know what to do with. It's been a couple of years since we've done something. After COVID, it kind of the wind out of everyone's sails. So I'm trying to, feel my way back. But also I'm practicing guitar as hard as I've done since I first started the thing. Trying to learn new techniques and new ways to approach the guitar to hopefully help my songwriting. And I don't want to get too far away from the Mugs, but I know I'd like to add a little bit of Peter Frampton into my guitar soloing, a little bit more Rory Gallagher. Some Joe Perry, and guys who kind of elude me, with the way that they play, and I'm trying to absorb those type of styles, adapt it into my own, and believe in riff rock.
Now, you put these, when you say you've got all these riffs, do you have them like kind of stored away as far as like recorded, or you just have them in your head?
I have them stowed away in my phone, actually.
Oh, okay. Well,
if I come up with a riff, so I have like a part of my phone where I record ideas, and there's like 30 ideas on there, some from a year ago, which I'm afraid to revisit. Sometimes, you smoke a little, have a few beers, like, this is a great riff, and then, a year later, you're like, that riff kind of stunk. Or if I revisit it, like, yeah, that was a good riff, or something like that. That's kind of how I've written. I do like to put an idea down if I really like it at the time, even if I'm buzzed, and I'll be embarrassed by it the next day. I would like to hear it the next day, and I'll learn from it, like, you were just buzzed, and it sounded like a good idea at the time, or, damn, that was a great idea. A ton of the Mugs were written in a state of inebriation that I thought was a stupid idea at the time, and the next day I listened to it, and the next day I'm like, that wasn't a stupid idea. You actually did all right. The weirder songs I've written actually, came out of a heightened sense of abandon, where you're just so buzzed and you're just like, screw it, just doing something silly, like, that could be stupid, but, we'll see how it shakes out. And I keep the ones that after a week that still sounds palatable, I'll keep it.
Just don't lose your phone.
No shit. 30 ideas that, oh God, I'm knocking on wood because hopefully you didn't jinx me.
Because I know a lot of people have done that. They'll save their idea onto a phone, but then they'll back it up onto a computer or laptop just for that reason, just for safekeeping. That might be something to consider. You just never know these days, right?
I'm such a technological dinosaur. Tony, he backs up everything. He'll record something and just, has 20 hard drives where he just knows where everything's at. Me, everything's just, I'm holding it in my hand right now of all my ideas. Like, geez, this is pretty precarious, Danny. You should maybe take it over to Tony's house and unload it on his
there you go.
hard drive. That's something I'll keep in mind, Jimmy.
Well, anyway, Dan, I'm going to let you go. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you so much for having me, Jimmy.
Oh,
you
my
asked great
pleasure.
questions. This was a blast talking to you.
Well, I appreciate it, man. And let me know. Keep in touch as far as anything, as far as coming gigs maybe this summer. Keep it up. I hope you continue success and you guys can play out and play some gigs. We'd love to come see it. My wife is a big blues fan. She loves the real traditional blues and all that. But, her favorite blues guy, because you didn't mention, was George Thorogood. She loves George.
Great player.
And we've seen him so many times, I know his set inside and out. But anyway, man, again, I want to thank you for taking the time out and talking today. It's been a pleasure, and I wish you the best of luck.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Jimmy. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you having me.
You have a good night.
Take care, man. Great conversation. I'll talk to you later.
All right, thank you. Well, that was Danny Muggs from the Mugs. It's just an awesome blues rock band. 3-piece power trio, very riff-oriented. You can really feel his influences. You mentioned Peter Green and Savoy Brown, and you can definitely hear that in it. And, to me, being a huge Led Zeppelin fan, I hear a lot of that in it too. The band has come a long ways. It's done so many things, winning all these music awards, going over and playing in Spain, whether it's headlining or not, but they got to do that also. Being on a television show, it doesn't matter if you win or lose, you're on it. It's the experience, and I can tell he's humbled to just been a part of it. I don't know how many of you out there remember that show, because I certainly don't, but if you look them up on YouTube, you can see their performance from Vegas in the desert, and as torturous as that must have been, they were just outstanding, really outstanding. Hey, is that old stereo system giving you the blues? Maybe the receiver has a blown channel, or the turntable just doesn't work right. Well, then you should visit my friends at 7 Grand Audio Service. Don't let the sign fool you. Yes, they've repaired televisions and VCRs, but their specialty is really vintage or any kind of stereo equipment. That's right, they've been in the business for over 40 years. Located at 25642 7 Mile Road in Redford, the owner Dash and his assistant Harry can fix just about anything. Receivers, tape decks, turntables, EQs, power amps, and yes, guitar and bass amps also. The phone number is 313-533-3635. They're open Monday through Friday, 10 to 6. Check them out and let them know that Jimmy sent you. And as always, keep rocking.